groups. Great to have you here. I pray that you've had a good Christmas and that you've recovered from all of the holiday busyness a little bit. Before we jump into the message, of course, we always like to take time to look in the camera and welcome our family that's joining us at Riverbend. Come on, let's tell our guys we love them. We appreciate you guys and honored that you're along for the ride today. I don't know if you guys saw earlier this week my post on Thursday, but we own property now, everybody. I don't know if you saw that or not, which is pretty cool. That's kind of a victory. We signed and closed on that, and now immediately looking into the plans and meeting with architects and builders. We just don't let grass grow under our feet very long. So, and we found out something at the closing. We found out that when they redid the survey that we had to do before we could close in the due diligence process, we picked up another acre. So we bought 29 instead of 28. I guess the equipment that they use now is better than it was in 1979 when they originally did the survey. So we found that out, and then we found out that the address is actually a Mount Juliet address instead of a Lebanon address because we literally are straddling the line. So anyways, it's great to have you guys along for the ride there. I was out there yesterday. When you drive by the property, you'll see the sign out there. When you're pulling out of the school, if you don't know where the property's at, just drive across 109. It's down on your left-hand side about a half mile on Central Pike. It's literally 1 minute from where we're standing at right now. So it's very, very close to where we are. So to God be the glory on all of that. Amen? That's awesome. Okay. We are in week 1 of a brand new series. We're kicking off the new year with a series we're calling Breathing Room. It's time of year, always an opportunity to kind of reset, recalibrate, reassess, reprioritize a little bit. And part of that process of reprioritizing is recognizing the unnecessary in our lives. What is necessary, what is not needed. We just want to make sure that we're thinking ahead together at what this year is going to entail. I mean, the reality is we don't know what this year holds. Just like you didn't fully know what 2017 holds. Maybe you had some experiences in 2017 that you just simply did not see coming. So this season, more than anything, is a season of preparation so that your heart will be ready for what God is already in the process of doing, so that we can receive it and be ready to walk into that in a new way for our families, for our relationships, for us as individuals, for your spiritual life, in your finances, in every area. We want to make sure that we're creating some breathing room. Breathing room. It's an opportunity for us to create some space, to slow down a little bit. But in order to create breathing room, you have to intentionally create, here's the word we're looking at today, margin. Margin. Think back to when you were in elementary school. You'd be writing on your notebook paper. You'd see the thin red lines along the outside, and your teacher would say, "Don't write past the red lines." And inevitably, you'd find yourself writing onto the desk, right? Which is exactly how some of us live our lives. We see margins, we see boundaries, and we live our lives in such a way that we ignore the margins, thinking that we can sustain it. I'm kind of an old school type of guy when it comes to how I prepare and how I teach. I teach from like real paper and I type every word out. I'm a manuscript teacher. And some of our team would tell you that I'm an old school guy when it comes to lots of things, not just how I teach. But when you're, of course, creating your layout of your document, you can choose how wide the margins are, which then determines how much content you can get on the page. When the margins are smaller, you can get more content on the page, which is good. Except for the fact that after I've printed off my notes, I take a pen out and I begin to read through and go over them a couple more times and rehearse them one more time. And while I'm doing that, I get these additional thoughts. If you've ever had to prepare a talk or a message of any kind, you know what I'm talking about. These are the last-minute thoughts that for some reason God didn't feel necessary to reveal to me in the 20 other hours that I was preparing. It's like we've had many conversations on this. Well, thank you, God, for this new thought. And here's the deal. When I don't have enough room to write my notes, I start writing along the side and I'm writing sideways, all because I haven't created enough margin. Here's the deal. If the margins are too small, I don't have enough room to write down what God is speaking to me. If my margins are too small, I've filled the page up with too much content. I don't have enough room to write what He's saying to me. Likewise, When you fill your life up with too much stuff, too much content, your margins become too small and you actually squeeze God out and you don't hear him when he's speaking to you. I'm going to give you a few definitions this morning of margin. Andy Stanley defined margin as this: the amount available beyond what is necessary. The amount available beyond what is necessary. I would kind of like to say it like this: margin is the difference between what you have and what you need. The difference between what you have and what you need. If I have 30 minutes to get somewhere and it takes 20 minutes to get there, I have 10 minutes of margin, which some of you have never experienced. I live in the margins. Margin financially would mean that you have money left over at the end of the month. I know maybe that's a foreign idea. Money left over at the end of the month. But margin could be emotional capacity to deal with your problems so that when your kid spills something on you, you don't unleash on them because you're overwhelmed and you have no margin in your life. Simply put, margin is what most of us do not have. Most people do not live with margin. I'm convinced, though, that the best things in life happen in the margins. The best things in life happen in the margins. The margins are essential. They are not optional. They are essential. You might even call them a guardrail. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to drive to Colorado Springs and to take the trip up Pikes Peak, 14,000 feet above sea level. It takes you about an hour and a half to make the drive to the top. It can be 60 and sunny at the bottom and 25 and snowing at the top. It's an amazing drive. It's also a very scary drive. There are often times when you're looking over the edge. They say, though, that after 100 feet, it doesn't really matter how high you are when you fall. So, I don't doesn't really help me with my fear. But here's the good news, though. There's a guardrail. There's a guardrail there. So since there's a guardrail there, I just drive the car right up alongside the guardrail, sparks flying, just grinding the car along the guardrail. No, I don't do that. Even though there's a guardrail, I stay as close as I possibly can still to the mountain, away from the guardrail. I do not want to get close to the edge. I don't want to see how close I can get to the edge and still not fall off. Listen to me. Some of us live our lives as close as we can get to the edge. It's not sustainable. At some point, you will fall. You don't get as close to the guardrail as you possibly can. You have to create some margin, some space. The problem is we're driving along, grinding the car along the guardrail, sparks flying everywhere. It's damaging us and everyone else around us. Margin. Margin is the difference between what you have and what you need. Let me say it this way. Margin is the space between the stuff that makes the stuff worthwhile. It's the space between the stuff that makes the stuff worthwhile. Okay, let's try it again. Margin is the space between the stuff that makes the stuff worthwhile. When we think about grammar and words and sentence structure, we think it's all about the words, but the problem is with no space, with no breath, with no breathing, it doesn't matter what you're trying to communicate. You could have the greatest words ever written, but without the spaces, nothing ends up being emphasized. It all just runs on. Have you ever had someone that was talking really fast and they were excited and they were trying to tell you everything that was going on in their life and they were talking so fast they weren't telling you anything and you weren't getting anything when they were talking to you because they were talking so fast it was ineffective? And you would say, hey, slow down, take a breath, breathe. You see, it's the space that not only makes communication effective, but it's the space in our lives that makes our lives more effective. You need space. You need breathing room, because if you fill up your life with too much stuff, nothing becomes worthwhile. Without the spaces in our lives, nothing ends up being emphasized. Nothing ends up being significant. It's the space between the stuff that makes the stuff worthwhile. If you don't create this space, nothing becomes important, because the quickest way for something to lose its significance in our lives is to take away the margins around those things. So think about the things that you would say are the most important things in your life. Oh, that's so important to me. My family is so important to me. My wife is so important to me. My kids, my spiritual life is so important to me. Listen to me. If the margins around those things are small, those things will begin to become insignificant in your life. You have to create space around the things that you say are the most significant, important things in your life. So if you want your family to stay significant, you need to create some margins around your family. If you don't create the space, you don't take time to pursue it and appreciate it, it will lose its significance in your life. It's important. When your emphasis begins to diminish, then what you say is important isn't really important, because you don't have any margin to actually appreciate it in your life. Let me give you one more definition. This is the last definition of margin. Margin is the distance between where you are and your limits. It's the distance between where you are and your limits. It's the guardrail. It's the yellow lines on the highway that you get to before you get to the guardrail. And then after you cross the yellow lines, what do you get to? You get to the rumble strips. What's the significance of the rumble strips? The significance is they're trying to tell you, hey, you're running out of margin. You might want to get back on the highway. Bad things are going to happen to you. If you keep going through the warning, you're going to end up in a ditch. And some of us live our lives on the rumble strips. Truth is, we're grinding the car along the guardrail, sparks are flying, and at some point, you're going to go over the edge if you live with no margin. So before we talk about practical ways to address this, I think it's important for us to just shine light on why we struggle so much creating margin in our lives. Because it's a difficult thing to do in the world we live in today, and here's the first reason: because we live in a world that celebrates busyness. We live in a world that celebrates busyness, and then busyness is equal to success. Well, they must be successful. They're busy. We equate busyness to success, and the truth is, a busy schedule does not equal a full life. It's interesting how the most common answers to the question, how are you doing, are one of two things. They are either, man, I'm just so busy, or the other one is, man, I'm just so tired. Two most common answers to that question. And sometimes it's a combination of two. I'm just so busy that I'm just so tired. We live in a world that celebrates busyness and calls it success. Look what Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. He says this: do not copy the behavior and the customs of this world that define success by being busy, but be a new and different person with a fresh newness in all that you do and think. By the way, you will never do it if you don't first think it. Then, if you actually start doing it because you're thinking it, you will learn from your own experience how His ways are actually really the thing that satisfies you. It's not the copying and the behavior of this world that satisfies you. Do not copy the way this world functions, its behaviors, the things that are so customary. Well, this is just the way it is, I guess we say. I guess everyone is maxed out and tired and overcommitted and living with no margin. And then another version says that we conform. We conform to the patterns of this world, and we copy their behaviors, and we live marginless lives. Because that's the way the world functions, right? Don't copy and conform, but be, another word it uses is transformed. You've got to change your thinking and unless you're going to change your living. Let me say it this way. You will never live differently than the world until you start thinking differently than the world. You've got to change the way your mindset is. And if you will do that, then you will begin to understand God's good and pleasing and perfect will for your life. This idea of margin, space, breathing room. Well, Devin, how do I renew my mind? I'm glad you asked. You've got to create some space. You've got to create some margin, some breathing room, so that you have the ability, the capacity to hear God's voice when He's speaking to you. We have to remove some things from our life in order to receive some things into our life. Pastor Brady Boyd at New Life Church in Colorado Springs wrote a book called Addicted to Busy. Great book. I'd recommend it to you. Judith Smith's book, How's Your Soul? Another book on just how to maintain and manage this healthy pace. But Brady Boyd says this in his book. He says, speed is the single greatest threat to a healthy life. Speed. In other words, the pace of our lives, the rhythm of our lives, the management of our lives has a direct impact on the health of our lives, which means that we have to be intentional with the amount of things that we let in our lives. Otherwise, we will never get out of our lives what God really wants from it. Satan would love nothing more for us to be busy. Do you know that busyness is a tactic of the enemy? It's a strategy. And the Bible says, don't conform to that. Don't copy that behavior. Here's another reason that we struggle with margin. Not only does our world celebrate busyness, but we're simply trying to do too much. I watched y'all. You're trying to do too much. In this busy world that celebrates busyness, equates it as success, most of us conform to that type of thinking, and therefore we conform to that type of living. We are piled on, stretched to the limit, chronically rushed, chronically late, chronically exhausted because we've conformed and copied. Some of us feel like Job felt in Job chapter 3. He says this, I have no peace, I have no quiet, I have no rest, and the trouble just keeps on a-coming. Some of you, that could be your life verse right there. Put that right up on your fridge, on your mirror. No peace, no quiet. You can relate. And yet we have parents that allow their kids to dictate what you say yes to. Like, can I just remind all of the parents here today, you actually determine how much time you spend in the car running from activity to activity. You do. You do. Well, no, they need to be in 3 different events at all times, year round. Who said? So what? Tell them no. That's a good word. No. No, we're not going to do that. No, actually, no, we're not going to do that. Here's a good idea. Tell them they have to pay for it and see how bad they really want to do it. I mean, you'll find out real quick if it was really a passion of theirs. It's amazing how easy it is to spend someone else's money, isn't it? And in some cases, listen, if you're really honest, it's your passion. It's not theirs. Living vicariously through your kids, running all over the place, living on the edge, trying to keep it straight, no peace, no quiet, no rest. Living the American dream. Because we copy the behaviors of the world. Here's a question for you. What are they learning really by being in the activity that they have to be in? Is it affecting their character? Are they becoming more kind? Are they becoming more grateful? Are they becoming more Christ-like by being in the activity that they have to be in? It's going to change their life. They say, well, I'd be robbing them of their childhood if I did that. Which one? The one that the world told them that needs to look like? That childhood? I mean, here's a question. Do you even pray about the activities that your children are in? I mean, do you pray? Well, you're just over-spiritualizing it. No. we conform and copy the behaviors of this world without even thinking twice about it. They say, well, I did it and their dad did it, so I guess they got to do it. No. Do they even like doing it? Well, it's just the way it is. Exactly. You've taken on a mentality. Because you've taken on the mentality, your life looks like everyone else with no margin. There's this wonderful story in the Bible, Matthew chapter 17, where it talks about margin. Luke chapter 10, sorry. And we talk about these two ladies that have an opportunity to display margin or not to display margin. Jesus and his disciples come back into Jerusalem. They come to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught, but Martha was, and here's the word, she was distracted. Now that word in the original language means she was anxious. She had anxiety by the big dinner that she was preparing. It's interesting that these two women have the opportunity to respond in the exact same moment. Jesus comes into Martha's house. He comes and sits down in the living room. Martha's in the kitchen. She's working, running around, making sure that everything's taken care of. It's perfect and just right. Busy, busy, busy. Martha was like many of us. She was distracted. She was wigging out. Interesting to me, though, that she wasn't necessarily distracted by something evil, wasn't distracted by something that we would say is sinful. She was distracted by what many of us would say was a good thing. In fact, in reality, she was distracted by the very thing that we might have been distracted by in the moment. She's thinking, okay, Jesus is in the house. I've heard some rumors about this guy. Son of God, Messiah. Let's get out the good china. Make sure the candles are lit. Make sure the toilet paper is going the right direction. Make sure the place is ready for Jesus. And she's distracted by good things that keep her from the best things. Corrie ten Boom said this: if the devil cannot make you bad, he'll just make you busy. Some of us are too busy. Mary, though, on the other hand, sits down in the living room with the disciples, and Jesus begins to listen to him, sits down at his feet, and she creates a moment for herself. I'm sure that Mary had some other things that she could have been doing. Martha was surprised that she wasn't helping, so this is out of character for Mary. She's surprised, she's kind of put out a little bit, and then she goes to Jesus in verse 40 of Luke 10, and she says this: Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits on her behind while I do all of the work? So I added a little bit there, sorry. Tell her to come and help me. In other words, it must be nice for you to just sit there and enjoy the fellowship and the punch while I run around like a crazy person making sure the toilet papers go in the right direction for Jesus. And what's funny to me is that Martha is absolutely convinced that she's doing the right thing. This is the most important thing. I'm here doing this. She's not doing what is the most important thing. And she tries to get Jesus, of course, to tell Mary to get up and help. And Jesus says, actually, no, your production mindset is missing the moment, and you're missing the best while you're distracted by what we would say is good. He says this in verse 41, but the Lord said to her, Martha, 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 you are worried and upset over all of these details. In other words, in your busyness, Martha, you are missing what's most important. Spending time with me. In your busyness, you are diminishing the significance of what you say is the most important thing in your life. And then in verse 42, Jesus gives us some insight here. He says this: Mary actually made a choice. So you actually have a choice. She made a choice, and it is a better choice, and it's going to stay with her forever. Now, I know what's happening now. I can sense the tension in the room. All the Marthas are thinking, well, somebody's got to get something done around here. I mean, thank God for people like me. Otherwise, nothing would ever get done. And listen, I'm not suggesting that we just sit around and do nothing and hope that life takes care of itself. I'm simply suggesting that we do a better job of discerning and determining what is urgent and what isn't. See, the problem is our lives have turned into everything being urgent. Everything's urgent. And everybody knows that as soon as they send the text, as soon as they send the email, it's with you everywhere you go, and they expect you to respond immediately. So many of us consumed, obsessed by accomplishing the urgent. Everything's urgent. And we miss the most important things by pursuing what we think are good things. Here's one that I hear all the time. Well, it's just my personality. Just the way I am. Just the way I'm wired. Not able to relax unless everything's done. And then when you get that thing done, you find something else that you think is undone, and you just move on. And it's a choice, actually. Mary chose. You are choosing to convince yourself that it has to be done right now. And you get distracted. We get worried and upset about the details and the wrong things. And the thing that is keeping us busy is actually the thing that we end up despising. All because it's a distraction. Jesus made it very clear who made the right choice in this situation. And it was Mary, because she made the choice to slow down. You see, when you have to slow down, that means you have to leave what you think has to get done right now and enjoy, in this case, the presence of Jesus. Question for you. What if it didn't get done right now? Like, what if it got done in a couple hours? All the Marthas are like, anxiety. What if it didn't? Is the world falling apart? Who's dying? Whose eternal destiny is at stake if it doesn't happen right now? Urgent. And I'm convinced that for the most part, nothing would happen other than you having to deal with something going on inside of you. I mean, come on. Let's do the work of creating some space and breathe. Let's eliminate some things from our lives that are unnecessary. Let's do this. Let's start the year by making the choice to sit at the feet of Jesus. How about that? Let's slow it down. God is calling all of us to a place of spiritual rest, to turn the TV off, to put the phone down, to close the computer screen, to reset, to reassess, to reprioritize. We're doing too much. We miss the important in the midst of thinking that we're doing what's right. And we actually mistake movement for forward progress. Well, I'm moving. I must be doing something right. I'm busy. Just because there's a lot of movement and commotion going on in our lives doesn't necessarily mean that progress is being made. Just because you're always in a hurry doesn't mean that you're actually getting somewhere. Some of us are like a Tasmanian devil, whirling dervish. Everywhere we go, chaos, noise. And here's the question. Are you making progress? In all of your commotion and movement? Or is it just a lot of moving around? Dr. Richard Swenson, in his book called Margin, great book, he says this: the conditions of modern day living devour margin. If you're homeless, we direct you to a shelter. If you're penniless, we offer you food stamps. If you're breathless, we connect you to oxygen. But if you're marginless, we give you one more thing to do. Marginless is being 30 minutes late to the doctor's office because you were 20 minutes late getting out of the hairdresser, because you were 10 minutes late dropping the children off at school because the car ran out of gas 2 blocks from a gas station and you forgot your purse. That's marginless. Take a breath. Living marginless actually causes us to fight the wrong battles. We begin to fight what we think are the enemies, and it's really just a result of us living with no margin. So we end up yelling at our kids and making them the enemy, when in reality the enemy was your lack of margin. And we end up being short with our spouse and making them the enemy, when in reality the enemy was our inability to say no. Say yes to everything. Is it possible that we are losing credibility with the closest people in our lives because we aren't fighting the right battles? Parents, is it possible that we're fighting the wrong battle and consequently losing credibility with those that you would say matter to you most? Mom and Dad, is it possible that your kids wish you would fight for the battle of margin and rest in relationship instead of fighting the battle of keeping up with the Joneses? Is it possible? Instead of fighting the battle of busyness and activity and more and being involved in everything under the sun, busyness is not success with our kids, by the way. How about being present? How about not being in a hurry? How about not throwing chicken nuggets at them in the back and say, shut up and get out? They'll become a major league player. Is it possible that our kids might actually respect us more if they saw us fighting for what was important? Is it possible? Fighting for relational health. How about this? Fighting for being around the table for at least a couple nights a week together. Is it possible that they would respect you more if you fought for that? Maybe that's the breathing room you need to create. Maybe you need to create a couple nights where it's family dinner. Maybe. And maybe as you protect that, and they know that it's important to you, you'll actually gain more credibility and respect from them because you're not just copying the behavior of the world. Is it possible that they would respect you more if you just said, hey, let's just be still for a minute. Let's relax and focus on relationship. Here's a question. Do your kids see you fighting for spiritual health? Do they see you fighting for a relationship with God? Do they see you reading Scripture? By the way, can I just commend to you, don't read your Bible on your phone because it looks the same to them. It looks the same as the conformity and the behavior and customs of this world. When you're just scrolling like get a, I know this is old school, like a real book out. Paper, print. The pages sound good when they turn. Old school. But let them know you're fighting for what matters most. Let them see you read Scripture. Maybe the margin that you need to create is simply a date a week, guys. I'm trying to help your marriage. One time a week. It might end good for you too. Just saying. We were playing ping pong a couple weeks ago. We had a couple friends, and we ended up playing husbands against the wives. I hadn't lost all evening, so I was the champion at that point. And before I was the champion. And before we started to play the game, one of the wives spoke up and she said, now you need to decide if you want to win now or if you want to win later. Now we just kicked their butt. I mean, and we lost later, by the way. I talked to my friend. I said, yeah, I lost too. Totally worth it. Totally worth it. The margin, the space that you need to create. I don't know where I'm at on my notes. I'm totally lost. That's off the grid right there. Some of you that are in business, you need to create some margin in putting your work aside at a given time. Like in the overall scheme of things, the email can probably wait. I mean, yes, it's going to require you redefining for them what urgent is and what the expectations are going to be. But some of you need to tell your clients that you stop working at 6, 7, whatever the time is, let them know that's when I stop. And then let them know I get to the office at 7 or 8 in the morning, and if I didn't respond to you by 6 the previous evening, I will respond to you by the next morning around 7 or 8 o'clock. That's margin, by the way. You've got to fight for that because they know you see it. They know you're holding it. They know it pops up on their screen, and you're setting an expectation that you're going to respond at 1 in the morning. That's no way to live. That is a marginless life. What we pursue matters. Matters to the health of our lives and our relationships and our effectiveness in this life. Margin allows you to fight the right battles. So the reason we struggle with it is because we live in a world that's busy, convinces us that busyness is success, which results in us doing a lot of stuff, but maybe not making progress. And we fight the wrong battles. You say, Devin, okay, I get it. I admit it. I need some margin in my life. Got it. I admit that I've bought into the lie that busyness is success, and I've bought into the lie that I'm doing something that's accomplishing more than it really is, and I admit it. I've taken on too much. I've said yes to too many things. I admit it. How do I create some breathing room? And I just want to give you 3 thoughts on that this morning. How to create some margin in your life. Super practical this morning. Biblical but practical. Listen, if you don't walk out of here every week being able to apply it to your life immediately, what's the point? I want you to be able to put biblical principle applied to your life immediately. Here's the first thing you got to do in order to create margin. You have to turn it off. Turn it off. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the noise. I'm talking about technology. I'm talking about the screens. What if you added up all the time that you and your kids spend looking at a screen? I mean, this technology thing is a huge deal. I've been convicted in my own life in the last week in this area. I love what Henry Cloud says in his book, Boundaries for Leaders. He says that you always get what you either create or what you allow. You will always get what you either create or what you allow. Think about that. In your home, in your work, in your finances, you get what you have either created or what you have allowed. You wonder why they're addicted to the screen? You either created it or you allowed it. You wonder why work consumes your every thought? Well, you either created it or you've allowed it. Some of us, the minute your alarm goes off, you open that thing up, you've got 14 alerts, 30 emails, and 7 texts waiting for you to respond to right then. I mean, as soon as you wake up, crack of dawn, your mind is instantly interrupted, instantly being drawn towards the urgent or so-called urgent, and your mind is being trained to copy the behaviors of this world. And you're off and running, and you don't stop until you're looking at the phone, and you scroll through your social media, and you put it down on the nightstand, and you set the alarm for tomorrow. What kind of life is that? What's the answer to that? You might want to write this down. You need to get to God before the distractions get to you. Get to God before the distractions get to you, which means you need to create some time, some space. Beginning of our day, we just wake up and go, hold up, no screens. But when do you spend time with God? And if you do, is it focused attention? Is your laptop open and your phone sitting there waiting for the first notification? Or are you too busy taking the Instagram shot of you spending time with God? No, you're not. You took the picture 5 times to tell me you were spending time with God. And the first notification that shows up on your phone means it's the end of the time with God, and you're off and running. You sit down with your Bible, screen's open, phone's there. It's not focused attention. I mean, can you even handle silence? I mean, that was 5 seconds. Torturous. And yet David writes this in Psalm 37, verse 7. Be silent in the Lord's presence, and here's another thing we're great at. Wait patiently for Him. Now, would that describe your time with the Lord? Psalm 62, verse 5. David, talking to himself, speaks to his soul and says, "My soul, listen up. Wait silently for God alone." I love this. "For my expectation is from Him. He only is my rock, my salvation. He is my defense, and I will not be moved." The way that you live a life that's unmovable is by waiting before Him. Problem is, we don't want to wait, so we live lives that copy the patterns and the behaviors of this world, and we're moved all over the place. Make the choice to get to God before the distractions get to you. The distractions are coming, whether you spend time with Him or not. You might want to prepare your mind and your heart and your spirit for what's coming. And then at some point, at the end of the day, you've got to say, enough is enough. Selah. Shut it down. You got to walk away at some point. I think you need to do this daily. I also think you need to do this weekly. It's what we call Sabbath. Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. "Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it, so it becomes holy when you keep it. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of," everyone say this word out loud, "of rest, dedicated to the Lord your God." And then in verse 11 he says this, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them." He's just showing off now. "But on the seventh day, He," what's the word? He rest. God needed rest. "That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy." It was holy because He kept it. We as humans are not created by God to work 7 days a week nonstop. He said, 6 days you work, then you rest. 6 days you work, then you rest. Are you taking a Sabbath? Are you resting? You know, that was in like the original Big Ten. Like, in fact, this passage of Scripture is taken where they deliver the 10 Commandments. It's like that is right there with murder, adultery, stealing. It's a big deal. Sabbath is not optional, it's oxygen, it's life, it's rest, it's spiritual rest. So creating margin is a spiritual practice. Saying no to things. You actually honor God when you rest. So that when you are working, you are at your best. I love this definition of Sabbath out of Walter Brueggemann's book, Sabbath as Resistance. He says this, "Sabbath is the refusal to let one's life be defined by production and consumption and the endless pursuit of private well-being. Sabbath is stopping work," and here's my favorite line in it. He says, "It's the refusal to be identified by productivity." That's Sabbath. God wants us to have a designated time where we turn it off. Here's the second thing you need to do to create some margin. You turn it off and you cut it out. Cut it out. Cut it out. I don't know how to say it any more simply than that, but you need to cut some stuff out of your life. Remove the unnecessary. If I went to the doctor and had an annual checkup and they came back to me and said, "Man, listen, we've looked at your lab results and you're in bad shape." And if you've had a doctor tell you that, you might be able to say, "Well, you didn't have to look at my lab results to tell me I was in bad shape. You could have just looked at me. I'm in bad shape." But if the doctor said, "Man, you're in such bad shape that you're going to have to change your life, because if you don't, you're going to die. But if you want to hang around a little longer, maybe if you want to see your grandkids and be useful and be healthy enough for God to use you, then you're going to have to change some things." Now, that's a pretty easy decision. I mean, it should be. Now, I've seen people get prognosis like that and just keep hammering down on the ho-hos. Totally ignore it. What if God looked at your life and said, "You're in bad shape, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, you're in bad shape. And if you want to enjoy this life, this abundant life that I actually have planned for you, it's actually going to require you to change the way you're living. It'd be kind of an easy decision. Should be. It's kind of like the old lifeboat game. You remember that game? 4 people on a lifeboat. Which one do you throw overboard first? Horrible game to play with your friends. Wonderful game to play with your calendar. When we get mad at our phone. Like these appointments are showing up on their own. Like you didn't accept it. Like you didn't hit okay. I get mad at my phone. And I said yes to all of them. And some of you, when you hear that, you're like, well, there's nothing I could get rid of. Everything in my life right now is necessary. Everything. Can't imagine cutting anything out of my life. I mean, the world would stop if I cut that out of my life. Which, if you think that, you need to talk to your doctor, which is probably your spouse, or a really close friend, or someone that's in your connect group. They are actually the rumble strips in your life. You need some rumble strips in your life. That's why it's so important for you to be in a group. You need people that love you enough that they will be honest with you. And they will say, I love you, I see this in your life, and you're living your life on the rumble strips. You're about to head into a ditch. Now listen, they love you. They're not trying to make your life miserable. They're trying to save you from yourself. If you don't have that voice in your life, you will live your life marginless. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 commends this to us. It says, so then, let us get rid of some stuff. Let's cut some things out. Let's drop some things. Get rid of everything that just gets in the way. And of the sin which holds on to us so tightly, it entangles us, another version says. And let us run with determination. You will not be able to run with determination if you don't cut some things out. You can't keep maintaining and holding on to everything. Remove some things from your life. You've got to cut it out. Finally, the way that we pursue margin in our lives, after we cut some things out, we need to fill it up. By that I mean you need to fill the most important part of you, and that is your spirit. Because you can't just clear the table and not replace it with something. It's this simultaneous intentional effort to remove the wrong things and replace them with the right things. Well, what do I fill it up with? Glad you asked. Matthew chapter 5. It was in our SOAP reading earlier this week. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst. We're going to fill our lives with this. And when you do that, you will be filled. A couple verses later. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. How many would like to see God in a new way this year? I would. Well, it's going to require you filling yourself with the right thing and purifying your life. You turn out the noise, you cut out the unnecessary stuff, you fill up on the things of God, and now you start to see differently. That's what this season is about for us as a church. Okay, I need you to just stick with me for about 5 minutes. I'm going to quickly transition to what this season really is all about for us over these next 21 days. Matthew chapter 17. A father has a demon-possessed boy. He took his son to the disciples to pray for him, thinking that he would be delivered. Nothing happened, so now he brings his son to Jesus, and he tells him, I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. Jesus responds, this is not to the father, it's to the disciples. He says, you unbelieving and perverse generation. He even looks at him and says, how long do I have to hang out with y'all? That's the Southern International Version there. How long do I have to hang out with y'all? Jesus says, and look at these two words, you unbelieving and perverse generation. What do those mean? Very simply, here's what it means. Unbelieving means you're not connected to God. You're not connected enough to God. And when you're not connected enough to God, your faith wanes, your hope wanes, and you begin to become unbelieving. But it wasn't just that they were unbelieving. Jesus says you were unbelieving and perverse. What does perverse mean? Well, if unbelieving is that you're not connected to God, perverse is that you're too connected to the world. And the reason it didn't work for you, boys, was because you weren't connected to me and you were too connected to the world and you were copying the behaviors, a pattern. So you can't just cut stuff out. You've got to fill it back up with the right thing. Well, if I want to connect with God, I want to disconnect from the world. How do I do that? Jesus actually gives us the answer. Same story. Pick it back up in verse 19. And the disciples came to Jesus in private because they were embarrassed, because they couldn't do it. And they asked him, hey, why couldn't we do what you did? He replied, because you have so little, you're unbelieving. Truly I tell you that if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. And now that's where most of us stop, right there. And that's the verse that's on our refrigerator. But Jesus actually wasn't done. Verse 21, he says, however, this kind does not go out except by, here's the answer, prayer and fasting. In other words, there are some things in the spiritual realm that you will not see and experience unless you do that. Why is it that I get so excited about this season? Favorite time of the year right now. Why wouldn't I get excited? Because I know God is going to do some things that he otherwise wouldn't be able to do when I do this. It changes everything. Something happens in the spirit realm that would not be happening unless I do this. Why wouldn't I get excited about that? Prayer and fasting, and we want to lead you. I want to lead you. I want you to be believing, connected to God. I want you to create some margin. So what connects us to God? Prayer connects us to God. Prayer. Prayer. You got a shorter answer? I don't really know if I've got time for prayer. I've got things to do, Devin. I mean, it's busy. No, but you want the miraculous in your life. You want the supernatural to be working. And it comes by connecting to God. We have these prayer guides. We have one for every family today. You'll get one as you leave. I've written a little letter here in the front of it to you, commending it to you. I am so shocked how Christians don't know how to pray. Shocks me. And so I've tried to, as simply as we can, resource you, give you a tool that helps you to develop a prayer life. By the way, prayer is not just this, hey, good to see you, great. That's like the conversations that Ashley and I have. You get the kids at 3? Yes. Got a dinner at 5? Yeah. That's kind of our prayer life. We never have a real conversation. No, it's a real relationship. But it wasn't just prayer. Jesus didn't stop there. He said it actually happens by prayer and fasting. What does fasting do? Well, fasting disconnects us from the world. Prayer connects us to God. Fasting disconnects us from the world. Long before the demon-possessed boy ever showed up, you know what Jesus was doing for 40 days? Praying and fasting. You think that's coincidental? Which begs the question, if Jesus could have accomplished all that he came to do without fasting, why would he do it? Just to torture himself? I mean, if Jesus needed to do it, maybe. Just throwing it out there. Because even the Son of God knew that there were supernatural things that could only be released by prayer and fasting. And really, there's no better time for you to do it. Beginning of the year. We've just come out of the most self-indulgent, materialistic season of the year. We're all fatter and we got all this stuff. Which is why we started doing this before we were even a church. in January of 2014. Myself, along with about 15, 20 other people, we were praying and fasting. Why? Because we knew that God could only do some things as we planted the church in September of that year that would only happen by that. You think those property deals just kind of happen? You get it for a fourth of the cost that everyone else is paying it for? Those things, man, you got lucky on that one. No. We were praying and fasting. You got to catch this. Jesus made it clear that fasting should be a part of the natural rhythm of the life of a Christian. In Matthew chapter 6, it's your soap reading for today. Matthew chapter 6, Jesus gives 3 when you statements. I won't go there now. But he says, when you give, when you pray, and when you, not if you, but when you fast. He just assumed that it was going to be a natural part of the rhythm of the Christ-like life. And I have people all the time, man, tell me about this. Fast, the church has done a disservice by not demanding that we instill and impart what Jesus thought were just natural things in the Christian life. So, I am compelled, I am honored, I want to lead you in a season of fasting. People go, man, you guys are serious about this. Yeah, because some things only happen by prayer and fasting. Listen, I just want to make sure you know, fasting is not penance. It's not suffering for the sake of proving you love God more than someone else. Fasting is not a diet. Sorry. You might lose some weight, but it's not a diet. A diet changes the way you look, but fasting changes the way that you see. And I know I want to see differently. I want to open some things. Ephesians chapter 1 says that you would open the eyes of my heart, that I might see wisdom and revelation, that I might know the hope to which you have called me to. Fasting is an intentional disconnection from the world. It's not about manipulating God to do something. You say, well, Devin, what should I give up? You might want to give up the very thing that you don't want to give up. Now, some of you, after the 21 days, should never pick some of those things up ever again. That's what the next 21 days are about. It's removing some things from our life that often consume so much time. And do you know how much of our life we plan around meals? I mean, eating is kind of a big, I've eaten with some of y'all. Eating is kind of a big deal to y'all. I mean, I've hosted you. Say that a way through to a man's heart is his stomach. Sin entered the world because of the stomach. I mean, imagine that. It's a pretty big deal. Different fasts that you can do. Listen, in our soap guide this month, it says really a special edition, 1 month only. It's all about prayer and fasting. We lay out all of the guidelines. A lot of people will be doing Daniel fast. We lay all of that out for you. Every reading that you have, starting tomorrow in your soap guide, is someone fasting in the Bible, because it was a natural part of the rhythm of people that served Christ. Fasting. Now listen, if you've never fasted before, can I just say, don't try to be a hero. Like, don't go, man, I'm just drinking water for 21 days. Don't do it. Don't do it, unless you know that the Spirit of God has told you to do it. Maybe start with a meal. And during that meal, connect with God, disconnect from the world, shut it off, cut it out, and fill up. Just get away with Him. Take your soap guide, read your chapter, observe, apply it to your life, pray it over your life. We have books back there that are available to you. I read these books every year during this fasting. I've read these books for the last, 10, 12 years during this season. Every year. Why? Because something happens when I commit to it. Listen, when I was hungry one day, and I was just, no, that's actually my dog. My dog did that. There's a 21, in Awakening, Stovall Weems' book, there's a 21-day journal in the back of it. You can follow along in that. We have 21-day prayer journals that go along with the fasting book. We'll give it to you at our cost, but if you can't afford it, take it. Take it. I just believe that strongly in it. Take it. We have people that will underwrite it, and we're honored to do that. So maybe you'll change up your routine in the morning. Maybe you'll kind of lay down something that's a part of your natural rhythm. Maybe you change that up. Say, Devin, are you suggesting that I not have my morning coffee? Well, if that's what you heard from the Spirit of God, maybe that's what I'm saying. I don't know. Well, I have to have my cup of coffee in the morning. I mean, you don't understand. I mean, this is life, and I'm going, you might want to dial the coffee down a little bit. Hey, when was the last time you said, I've got to have my time with God? I mean, if I don't have my time with God, I'm not making it through the day. When was the last time you said that? Maybe you'll remove some things that you know are distraction. Computers and video games. Social media. Some of you just need to delete the app and never go back. I mean, the amount of time. As you're driving off the parking lot today, your last post should be, see you in 21, y'all. Bye. Delete it. Some of you need to take a break from CNN and Fox. It doesn't help you. You actually think that the decisions on Capitol Hill shake God. Ooh. Do you hear about the new tax bill? Ooh, God's wringing his hands. I mean, the Lord is not intimidated or shaken by Washington, D.C., everybody. You are, but he's not. And listen, if you'll do it, I'm just asking you to go on the journey. If you'll do it, you will be a different person after the end of the 21 days. I just know it. I've lived it. Fasting disconnects us from the world. Prayer connects us to God so that we can cut some things out and then fill up. How many want to fill up on the right thing this year, everybody? I want to fill up on the right thing, don't you? Come on, let's just bow our heads.